question is, how do we move forward and how do we further limit the Taliban insurgency? Because it seems like we're kind of at a stalemate right now.
Yeah, and that brings us to some of the limits of what the Allied forces have been able to accomplish, right? So today there is, although it's much better than what it used to be, there's still a lot of insurgency going on. And the Taliban has control of a lot of villages, a lot of areas in Afghanistan. So with the deal, why is it necessary that the Allied forces stay? Like, why do we want those 8,000 to 12,000 troops to remain in Afghanistan? I mean, within the, among the Middle East, I'm from Turkey. I read a lot of Turkish newspapers that constantly say, oh, the U.S. promised to leave, but they're not actually leaving. I'm like, you really think these people want to stay in Afghanistan and keep spending this money and have their troops dying? There is a reason why these people feel the need to stay there. And one of the reasons is that Taliban still exists, and at some parts of Afghanistan, they think they're winning this war.
Afghan police say 7 insurgents were involved in Monday's pre-dawn attack at Kabul airport. Their assault on an unfinished building next to the international airport site ignited a 4-hour battle with security forces. Police said 5 of the militants were killed in the fighting. The other 2 were suicide bombers who blew themselves up. Attacks on the heavily guarded airport used by the military and civilians are relatively rare. The assault could add to the growing fears over the ability of Afghanistan's own security forces to cope when most foreign combat troops leave next year.
So I think it's important to remember that it's very easy to focus on the negatives of what's happening in Afghanistan. Things like civilian deaths and Americans going rogue, or any sort of negative implication of, well, if the American troops weren't here, this wouldn't have happened. That's sort of an easy argument to make. It's not a very advanced argument.
Isn't there this whole argument that, when a country goes into war with another one, especially with a lot of insurgency in a country, them being there, just that promotes that insurgency. A lot of people, I think, a lot of theorists would argue that simply the fact that the United States is there is making the insurgency, the Taliban attacks on civilians or whatnot, increase, because they want to make it, they're using the U.S. being there, or the Allied forces being there, the West being there in their country as invaders.
I think the Taliban is a very expedient group, which means they're going to use the best argument available to them to justify their violence and their extremism. Mm-hmm. I agree, tentatively I agree, that American presence certainly is used by the Taliban to justify their activities and their insurgency. That does not mean that if America leaves tomorrow, the Taliban will stop doing what they're doing. So just because America leaves, that's not this golden key, that's not this silver bullet that's going to solve the Taliban problem. If anything, the indication is that the Afghan security complex between the military and the police is not up to the task, that the Taliban have gained strength recently, that they're increasing their killings and violence against civilians and their oppression of the areas that they control. So if America were to leave, there's no reason to suggest that that trend would not continue.
Yeah, and also I think it's a little bit hypocritical that Karzai has been saying, we want the Americans to leave because they are killing all our civilians with their drones and their nightly raids. But according to a United Nations report that's on the ground, so this is a report made by the people on the ground in Afghanistan, that 77%, this is almost 80%, of the civilian deaths and injuries, so not just the deaths, but deaths and injuries, so the attacks in Afghanistan are caused by the Taliban. So yeah, I hate the fact that, every now and then a U.S. soldier goes rogue, like it did a few weeks ago. We had this whole, in the news that, one soldier goes rogue and opens fire on civilians and kills 16 Afghani civilians, and all of a sudden it's, oh no, the United States, the imperialists, they're here and they're killing our people. I mean, the Taliban is doing this every day. They're doing it either just out of their own spite, or they're doing it to blame the U.S. on some of these things. I mean, we have a friend who is in the military. And we heard a story that he told us while he was there that what was the story, Jay?
Essentially, the Taliban carjacked a civilian and told him, if you don't take this truck and drive it to that American military barricade as fast as you can, I'm going to kill your family. So, obviously, he drove, and the American forces did what they had to do. They stopped the truck. They killed the driver. So the Taliban tried to take this instance as, oh, American military are killing your civilians and your neighbors. But there were other civilians who witnessed the attack, and they saw everything that happened. So by explaining
that... And they challenged this narrative.
They challenged the narrative that the Taliban offered, and by explaining it, everyone was able to realize, no, obviously the Taliban are the bad guys here. It's not the Americans.
I mean, these people are liars. They're oppressors, and
the Taliban.
And the Taliban, and there's good reason for why the Allied forces were there in the first place. And I think there's also good reason why a certain amount of the troops should stay after 2014. And so according to the deal, that also they're expecting that these troops that are staying, the extra 8,000 to 12,000, would be staying until 2024, so for the next 10 years. But I have this one question of there have been, 80,000 troops, most of which is American, but Allied forces, so the ISAF has had around 80,000 troops in Afghanistan for 12 years. And they have not been able to get rid of the Taliban. So how does 8,000 troops for another 10 years help? I mean, from a strategic point of view, okay. I think obviously staying helps, because you get to monitor these people. But strategically, if 80,000 didn't help solve this problem in the past 12 years, how is 8,000 supposed to solve this in the next 10 years?
I think it's a question of sort of like how you define your goals. Okay. In the beginning, the goal, obviously the ideal goal would be to eliminate the Taliban. That's an ideal goal that's very difficult to do. Just like in World War II, the goal was to eliminate the Nazis. Nazis still exist, right? Mm-hmm. Neo-Nazi parties still exist.
Actually.
So more important than sort of eliminating the Taliban initially was just to remove them from power. And we accomplished that goal. Now I think the long-term goal needs to be to train the Afghanistan security apparatus, mm-hmm. the police and the military and the intelligence branches and all those groups in Afghanistan. America needs to be able to train them up, again, part of nation building, so that they can secure their own country without help. Notice that this doesn't involve completely eliminating the Taliban. Yeah. It allows Afghanistan to be in a position in the future to fight the Taliban on their own without the continued presence of American troops.
And that is essentially what the United States has been proposing, right? So they're proposing that the troops that stay after post-2014 are not going to be involved in combat operations, that rather they're going to be, I want to use the exact words because I really like it, to assist, advise, and train the forces. So this is the only reason why they're staying. They're not staying there to conduct combat operations. They are requesting that, in case of emergencies, there should be raids to what is considered civilian houses. We don't really know what is civilian and what's not at this point in Afghanistan. So, of course, they're requesting this, but essentially what they want to do in these past years is that, as you said, make sure that the Afghan military have the correct infrastructure to be able to deal with this problem on their own. And at the moment, quite frankly, it seems like they don't have it.
They don't. So let's move now and talk about sort of potential ways forward